From Homeless to Millionaire, The Story of X, Part 2. The world outside was cold, wet, and indifferent, yet X felt a stirring inside him, a whisper of possibility that refused to be silenced. He had spent countless nights on concrete, huddled under tattered blankets, the city's neon lights flickering like distant stars that seemed forever out of reach. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and the biting wind tested his very will to live. But amid the relentless despair, a small ember of hope refused to die. One particularly stormy night, as he wandered the empty streets, X noticed a faint glow emanating from a nearby building. It was a public library, its doors slightly ajar, as though inviting him in. Hesitant but drawn by curiosity, he stepped inside. The smell of old books, paper, ink, and polished wood struck him with the sense of comfort he had not felt in months. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched before him, filled with the accumulated wisdom of generations. He wandered through the aisles, brushing his fingers against the spines, absorbing the silent promise that knowledge could change one's life. He found a quiet corner, opened a book on entrepreneurship, and began reading. Every page was a revelation, tales of men and women who had begun with nothing and, through relentless perseverance, built empires fascinated him. For the first time in years, X felt the intoxicating sense of possibility. Maybe he could change his life too. From that night onward, the library became his sanctuary. Days merged into nights as X devoured books on business, personal development, and self-discipline. He scribbled notes onto scraps of paper, memorizing every lesson, every principle that might one day help him escape his circumstances. But knowledge alone was not enough. X needed action. He started seeking work. Any kind of work, no matter how menial. After days of rejection, he found a small, rundown cafe looking for part-time help. His first day was brutal. Hours blurred together as he washed dishes, scrubbed floors, and served weary customers, often receiving little recognition. Yet X clung to the work like a lifeline. He treated each task as an opportunity to learn, to cultivate patience, discipline, and resilience, the very traits that successful people had emphasized in the books he read. After weeks of tireless work, X had saved enough to experiment with small entrepreneurial ventures. He began creating handmade crafts to sell on street corners. His first sales were meager, sometimes barely enough to buy a simple meal, but each transaction filled him with a sense of pride and possibility. Failure became a teacher. Rejection became a motivator. Every small setback reinforced the belief that if he persisted, change was inevitable. It was during this period of small experiments that X encountered a mentor, a seasoned businessman who saw in him the raw determination that many overlooked. This man offered advice, guidance, and even a small loan to help X start a tiny venture. With renewed determination, X poured everything he had learned into this opportunity. Long hours, sleepless nights, and endless problem-solving followed. Mistakes were made, yet each one offered invaluable lessons, and slowly the seeds of success began to sprout. X's journey during this phase was punctuated by moments of triumph and despair, often occurring in quick succession. There were nights when he would sit alone, counting coins, wondering if the struggle would ever end. Then there were mornings when a small client payment or a word of encouragement reminded him that his life was slowly changing. Each day, he became more confident, more resourceful, and more resolute. The early mornings became X's most precious hours. Before the sun even hinted at its arrival, he would wake, wash his face in the cold water from a cracked public tap, and walk the streets in search of small opportunities. Every job he had done so far, the cafe, the delivery errands, and even his street-side craft selling, taught him lessons no classroom could ever offer. He learned the rhythm of life from observing people, how they made decisions, how they spent their money, and most importantly, how they valued determination and integrity. One chilly morning, while delivering packages for a local shop, X noticed a small stationery store with a help wanted sign. Without hesitation, he approached and spoke with the owner. "I'll work hard. I may not have experience, but I have determination," his voice trembling slightly, yet carrying a conviction forged through months of hardship. The owner, a man in his 50s with a discerning eye, studied him for a moment before nodding. "All right, you start today." The job was simple, yet grueling. X stocked shelves, cleaned the counters, and served customers with the smile he often didn't feel. But each small action mattered. He began to notice patterns: which products sold faster, which customers returned, and how pricing affected sales. Slowly, the knowledge he had acquired from books began to converge with practical experience. Theory met reality. Evenings were spent back at the library, not merely reading, but analyzing his day. He would take notes. Notice how people respond to polite greetings, or observe which products attract attention and why. He realized that success wasn't just about ideas, it was about observation, adaptation, and understanding human behavior. It was during one of these nights that a spark of creativity struck him. X began to sketch small business ideas, simple ventures that required minimal capital but could potentially grow. He considered selling homemade products online, offering small services to local businesses, or tutoring children in subjects he excelled at. Each idea was documented meticulously with the plan for execution, estimated costs, and potential returns. However, opportunity rarely comes without obstacles. His first attempt at selling homemade crafts online ended in disappointment. Despite days of work, his first batch of products failed to attract buyers. Frustration threatened to crush his spirit, but X remembered a lesson from one of the books he had read. Failure is the tuition you pay for success. With that in mind, he analyzed the failure, pinpointing flaws in presentation, pricing, and marketing. He tried again, refining each element, learning from every misstep. Slowly, the tide began to turn. His second attempt brought modest success. A few customers purchased his products, leaving positive feedback. While the income was not life-changing, it was enough to kindle a sense of accomplishment he had never known on the streets. For the first time, X felt a tangible connection between effort and reward. During this period, X also learned the value of mentorship. One afternoon, a regular customer at the stationery store, noticing his dedication and insight, introduced him to a local entrepreneur. This mentor, a man who had faced his own struggles but built a thriving business, took X under his wing. He taught him financial basics, networking strategies, and the subtle art of negotiation. More importantly, he modeled a mindset of perseverance, patience, and calculated risk-taking. Through these experiences, X's character began to evolve. He no longer saw himself merely as a survivor of circumstance. He began to see himself as a builder, a learner, and a strategist. Each small success reinforced his belief that his past hardships were not chains, but teachers preparing him for something greater. By the end of this stage in his journey, X had accumulated not only modest savings, but a foundation of skills, knowledge, and confidence. He had learned how to navigate the world of work, how to identify opportunities, and, critically, how to persist when immediate results were absent. The spark of hope that had flickered in the library months ago was now a steady flame, illuminating the path ahead one step at a time toward the life he had long dreamed of. Buoyed by his small wins and the guidance of his mentor, X began to dream bigger. He realized that survival alone would never lead to wealth or freedom. The small jobs and craft sales had taught him discipline, patience, and the fundamentals of human interaction. But now it was time to create something of his own, something that could grow beyond the limitations of a side hustle. With a small sum saved from his various endeavors, X rented a modest stall in a busy marketplace. The stall was no more than a wooden table with the cloth draped over it, but it was his own space, a canvas for his ideas. He decided to sell handmade decorative items that combined creativity with affordability, items he knew could appeal to everyday customers. He meticulously arranged the products, ensuring that they caught the eye and priced them carefully to balance profit and accessibility. The first few days were brutal. Sales were slow and passersby often ignored him, focusing on larger, more established vendors. Each day, he returned home exhausted, counting coins and evaluating his strategy. There were moments of doubt. Amid these external challenges, X faced an internal struggle as well. The shadow of his past, the nights on the streets, the hunger, the humiliation, still haunted him. At times, he felt unworthy of success, doubting whether he deserved the opportunities now unfolding before him. It was in these moments that the wisdom he had absorbed through books, mentors, and personal reflection came alive. He repeated mantras of perseverance, visualized the life he was building, and slowly his mindset transformed. The man who had once believed he was powerless was now cultivating belief, focus, and determination. By the end of this phase, X had not only established a modest but thriving stall, but he had also laid the groundwork for future ventures. He had learned critical lessons: adaptability, resilience, customer understanding, and the value of persistent effort. More importantly, he had begun to internalize the principle that success is rarely instantaneous. It is a result of consistent, focused action combined with an unshakable belief in oneself. For X, part two of his journey represented a shift from survival to strategy, from reacting to circumstances to shaping his own future. Each small sale, each interaction, each lesson learned was a building block, preparing him for the larger challenges and victories that lay ahead. And while the path remained uncertain, one thing had become clear. X was no longer a victim of circumstance. He was a student of life, a builder of opportunity, and a man steadily, step by step, turning his dreams into reality. The mornings in the city were always harsh, but for X, they had taken on a new meaning. The biting wind and damp streets, which had once been symbols of despair, now became the stage for his awakening. Every sunrise was a reminder that yesterday's hardships could fuel tomorrow's victories. Gone were the days when he wandered aimlessly, hoping for luck or charity. Now, armed with knowledge, ambition, and a will tempered by survival, he sought opportunity at every corner. He started by revisiting the library, the place that had first reignited his hope. The shelves that once seemed impossibly vast now felt like a map to a new world. X spent hours not only reading, but analyzing, making notes, and visualizing how each lesson could translate into action. Tales of self-made entrepreneurs, inventors, and leaders who had clawed their way from poverty to prominence became more than stories. They became blueprints. With a notebook filled with ideas, X began to observe his city differently. He watched people interact, noticing their habits, their desires, their fleeting interests. The bustling marketplace, once a place of noise and confusion, now appeared to him as a network of possibilities. Where others saw crowds, X saw potential customers, vendors, and collaborators. Where others saw barriers, he saw patterns to exploit. Slowly, a vision began to form. If he could combine creativity, persistence, and insight into human behavior, he could carve out a niche for himself. His first step into entrepreneurship was humble, but significant. With the modest savings he had accumulated from odd jobs, he rented a small stall in a crowded market. It was nothing more than a weathered wooden table with a faded cloth, but it symbolized autonomy, the first tangible manifestation of his efforts to change his life. X decided to sell handmade decorative items, simple, affordable pieces that could appeal to everyday customers. He spent days perfecting the arrangement, the color combinations, and the presentation. Every detail mattered because he understood that perception could make or break a sale. The first week was a lesson in patience and endurance. Sales trickled slowly, often non-existent for long stretches, and passerbys ignored him in favor of larger, more established stalls. He endured long days under the harsh sun, standing for hours on end, greeting customers who sometimes walked away without a glance. Each evening he returned home exhausted, counting coins and replaying the day's events in his mind. Doubts crept in. Was he wasting his time? Did he truly have what it took to succeed? Yet X had learned a crucial lesson. Perseverance is forged in the fire of adversity. He experimented with every variable he could control: product placement, pricing, customer engagement, and even how he spoke and presented himself. Slowly, subtle changes began to yield results. A few customers complimented his creativity, a local cafe purchased decorative items for their tables, and word of mouth started spreading. Each small victory was a spark of validation, reinforcing the belief that he was on the right path. But the road to success was never linear. A sudden storm one afternoon destroyed part of his stall, ruining inventory and leaving him disheartened. The financial loss was painful, but X had cultivated resilience through months of struggle. He worked tirelessly to rebuild, salvaging what he could and borrowing a modest sum from his mentor to repair the damages. This episode was a turning point in his understanding of risk. Opportunity always carried uncertainty, but preparation, adaptability, and determination could turn setbacks into stepping stones.